Hawkeye hoops coming out swinging. Some big-time offers in the class of 2025-26. What's next for Iowa and the NCAA? The latest from Scott Dochterman. All today, Locked On Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube and watch us over there. While you do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. You can find me on X on Twitter at Trent Condon, or you can find the show page at Locked On Iowa. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So we got a little basketball here as the big recruiting day happens yesterday. We find out a number of the prospects that Iowa is going to be targeting in the classes of 2025 and 2026. Maybe going to dispel the notion out there that Fran McCaffery is on his way out of Iowa City and is be looking for a new spot with what they're doing in the portal this past season, what they were able to do, maybe keeping things together. We'll see. We'll get into that. We got a little football talk for you. A lot also coming up with Scott Dochterman of The Athletic, who covers college football as well as anybody. We are incredibly lucky to have somebody like this on the Iowa beat. He does an incredible job both on the local level with the Hawkeyes and also what he does at both the Big Ten and the national level. He was out in LA last week before the Big Ten meetings that were held out there, and a lot of great information just about the future of what we look at with Hawkeye athletics. And eventually, how's this all going to be paid for? We'll get into that with Doc. But I want to start with basketball today. And as we sit here and we await the decision coming up on the 29th, it'll have to happen by midnight Eastern. That'd be 10:59, I guess, for us here in the Central Time Zone, as we'll get the official announcement one way or the other of what's going to happen with Payton Sandfort. And though my anticipation is that he's leaning towards coming back for his final season in a Hawkeye uniform, it's still very unknown. You have to figure this is an incredibly difficult decision for him. And one way or the other, we'll have you covered and we'll have more on his decision and how that's going to shape Iowa basketball. But a big group of offers went out on Tuesday to a number of different prospects. And it's interesting. So we look at this recruiting class coming in this year, at least the two-man freshman high school recruiting class coming in this season. You have Cooper Koch. Legacy, his dad JR played for the Hawkeyes back in the 90s. Makes a lot of sense. A guy that can shoot it and really looks to be one of the prototypes of Fran McCaffery basketball. What he likes, very skilled offensive player, not an uber athlete, but a guy that has a high basketball IQ, can really fill it up from the outside, an elite level offensive player, and some length that maybe he can do some things defensively. But then after the addition of Chris Taggio, that was maybe step number one. Taggio is considered a ridiculous athlete, an athlete in the lines of a guy like Tyler Cook that we saw here, at least in somewhat recent history. That kind of high flyer, a Doug Thomas type. That's the kind of athleticism that we're talking about with Chris Taggio, a guy that is known as a great rebounder, developmental guy offensively. But with the way that Fran McCaffery teaches offense, that's why I think I am excited about Taggio. And I think a lot of people are looking at what Fran has been able to do with some raw talent, what he's been able to build them into as offensive players. And then you look at what they did here, the calendar, with not a huge budget, with certainly not the NIL funds that a lot of programs have out there for college basketball, going and getting Thelwell, a true point guard, a guy that is a good athlete at that position, a guy that can get to the rim, a guy that at minimum is an adequate defender, something different than the quote Fran prototype. Look, Fran has a type, right? I like to joke around about this. We all have a type, right? Talking about, who you're keeping your eye on. But also basketball coaches have a type. And that's why you see so many teams year after year that look very similar. Wisconsin has a type. Coaching staffs have types. And Fran McCaffery definitely has his type. Well, Cooper Koch, one of those types. Very skilled offensive guy, maybe some work to do defensively. limited athleticism. That's more of Fran's type. But then Tajo is a little bit different. Tajo with that elite athleticism. Now, Fran's not going to turn it down. I mean, that's not what I'm saying here. That Fran just, no, I'm looking for the worst athletes. No, that's not what it is. But it's also the guys that you can attain. That aside. But then they go out, they get Thelwell. Pretty good defender, pretty good athlete. Worked with the bad wrist this season. Hopefully the shooting improves along with it. And then also getting Sadu from Manhattan. Another guy, really good athlete, good athleticism. And it led to all these offers coming out and kind of seeing, are we seeing a change in philosophy, at least an evolution in the philosophy that Fran McCaffery is utilizing and some of the guys that he is going after? At first, not exactly. There were a lot of Fran types in there, but there were a couple of names that, at minimum, excite you. Now, you also have to remember that a lot of these guys are going to be long shots. And when we're talking about these offers, they're going to get 20, 30, 40 of these offers coming up here in the coming days and weeks. And because of that, Iowa very quickly are probably going to be gobbled up. A guy like Maisie Mosley, top 50 player at Rivals, 6'4", little frail, 166, not real strong at this point, but a shooting guard. But he also has UCLA, San Diego State, Cal, Michigan, Washington after him. We'll see on that type. Some of the other guys in the class of 2026, the only local, at least in-state guy that we saw receive an offer is Jaden Kuhn. Kuhn from Storm Lake up in Northwest Iowa, put together an incredible season, a really good athlete in his own right. Already had a high D1 offer from TCU and now adds Iowa along with it. Averaged 20 points, nearly 9 rebounds per game, 2 steals and a block and a half per contest for the Stormers a season ago. So that's one to keep an eye on the local front, something that always is incredibly impressive. Are there some other names in there? And really that class of 2026, that's what jumped out to me, is in that class at least, a lot of big-time athletes, not just great basketball players. And you're going early on, you're going whale hunting, right? You're looking for some of those big fish or big mammals, depending on the type. Whatever it is, you're trying to get those guys to come in. Just something to keep an eye on as we await Payton Sandfort, what his decision is going to be. And this decision is incredibly important for the future of Iowa basketball. The momentum that Fran had built with the program has stopped. And as much as I enjoy at times the brand of basketball, the style of play, getting back and having a team that'll get up and down the floor, without the success in March, without NCAA tournament success, the fan base, as we've seen, they're fed up. And if you go through another season similar to last year, and I think minus Payton Sandfort, I don't see a realistic path for this being an NCAA tournament team next season. I just don't. And if that happens for the second year in a row with a program that is already stagnated, I think you're looking at some big-time issues. Payton Sandfort's decision, we're going to find out May 29th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time at the latest. Going to shape a lot. And maybe potentially the legacy of Fran McCaffery in this program. A lot of weight on that young man's shoulders. We continue here, Locked On Hawkeyes. Time to talk to the Doc. Scott Dochterman going to join us. We're talking NCAA. We're talking Hawkeyes and a whole lot more with the man on the Hawkeye beat with the Athletics, Scott Dochterman. He joins us next. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bet with any winning $5 bet. $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on everything. You can use point spreads, money lines, player props, futures, and a whole lot more. They have you covered at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot. Maybe you're taking a peek forward, looking at Thursday evening after that decisive win this evening from the Minnesota Timberwolves, and to extend the series to Game 5. The line's already out at FanDuel, and the Timberwolves are a 4.5-point favorite as that series shifts its way back to Minnesota. FanDuel.com/lockedon for every playoff moment. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Scott Dochterman back from the West Coast, where he took in Big Ten meetings out in Los Angeles. He is back and he joins us. Doc, Trent, and Ken, thanks for coming on, Scott Dochterman. How are you? How was the Pacific Coast?
It was fine. It was a lot of work. It was busy, but California has got a great view of the Pacific Ocean.
Yes,
so
it
I
does.
guess there's nothing to complain about that.
No. So what did I guess a takeaway or two, Doc, from the meetings that you were able to opine on and talk to people afterwards? What were what did you bring home to Iowa that you heard out there?
I think mostly, since I left was when everything transpired with the House case getting settled. But I think that there seemed to be, for the first time I can recall, just a general sense of confidence that something is going to happen that's positive and provide some sort of normalcy to college athletics in the coming future. And that's not, they know that there are still many outstanding issues related to everything from the not necessarily the portal, but dealing with paying student athletes, the issues with walk-ons, whether you're talking about a complete roster or scholarship limits, those are kind of molding together. But I think right now it's like we're finally getting a little bit of clarity and going into a direction, which it felt like they were pretty driftless for the last several years.
Makes a lot of sense to go through all these things, but in the end, do we really know? Do you have a feeling that eventually things are going to normalize, are going to get this figured out, or we keep hearing it's a wild, wild west, and we don't know exactly what is going to happen? With the framework now out there, with the case that has been settled, the settlement money that's going to be going out, are we at least trending in the right direction, that we can see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes and no. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I mean, we don't know the full parameters and what's going to happen here, how everything is going to get solved necessarily. But I think, what we do know is that with money being brought in-house, that allows for athletics departments to kind of start to organize and figure out how to do this and some of the shenanigans, not all of them, but some of them related to collectives in a lot of places. Not so much Iowa and Iowa State. I think they're pretty well set, but what it'll provide for is that the majority of the players that go out and say do community service on behalf of the collective and earn money, that's the stuff that's going to be inside the athletics department. The other stuff, which I think will never solve, is that when schools want a player, a 4-star player, a 5-star, a high 3-star player, they're going to find ways to do it. And that's why I don't think that collectives are going to go away. They're probably going to morph into something else, because now the majority of kids who are 3-stars in the state of Iowa are going to go to largely Iowa State, maybe Nebraska, maybe Kansas State or Minnesota or something like that. And the majority of those are going to have those goals accomplished until they become really good players, and then they'll need something bigger. But I think you go to Chicago for a 4-star, Dallas for a 4-star. That's where the collectives are going to have to come back. And in some ways, it kind of unshackles the athletics departments from the collectives, where things are going to have to be even, versus with collectives, you have the ability to say, we're just going to do this for one sport. We're going to be like a quarterback club that helps provide payment for some of those players.
Mm-hmm. I see it that way too. In fact, I think it might be a little bit easier for the collectives to sell what they're trying to do to fans, because now the universities are actually paying some of that freight. It's just not incumbent upon the fans to pay the way we'll see. Doc, anything on Title IX? I know that Charlie Baker, his stance apparently was, Title IX is all about opportunities. It's not about financial aspect of it. We have to have as many opportunities for women as we do for men. It doesn't say anything about the finance. Of course it doesn't. It wasn't legal. How is this good? Is that maybe as big of a fight as there is still left to be decided?
You know that dollar bill you've got stuffed in?
Well, to me, that's one that's going to be litigated, and it probably will go all the way up to the Supreme Court, because Some athletics departments are operating under the fact that you've got to pay the athletes according to the same percentages that you give them in scholarships. So if at Iowa, for instance, I believe it's like 52% of the athletes are female, then you provide, 52% of $20 million or how much you're going to spend to female athletes. Well, that's why collectives are going to be in existence, because the majority of almost all the money that people are raising are for football and men's basketball to pay those athletes. And if you're going to provide $9.8 million to men and 10.2 to women, it's really going to get, challenging to break a collective or try to put them under any kind of auspices. And so I think that's what we're looking at right now how is this going to operate? And if it is, what's the percentages? How are you going to be able to do it? I mean, you can't do $19 million for men's and $1 million for women's. I mean, good luck. You will get lost and get a suit, but they got to figure something out, because otherwise you're back at square one with collectives.
There's been a conversation had many times, and Doc, I don't know if we've talked about it, but the potential of football breaking away and becoming its own entity. You license the Iowa Hawkeyes name, but it's not part of the athletic department. Is that reality? Is that something? I know it would take a lot of lawyers to make something like that happen, but is that a real possibility down the line?
No, I don't think that breaking away from the athletics department in the university is going to happen. That it remains, so embedded, first of all, and they have to be student athletes. That's the reason why they exist, college athletics departments. However, breaking apart from the NCAA is something that is legitimate, but in some ways, I think you don't really want to do that, because the NCAA provides a lot of, structure to collegiate sports as it is. Now, if you can have a different governance structure or plan within that or away from it, but yet all be connected, I think that's probably what we're heading towards. I mean, right now, what has to happen is the NCAA and the member institutions to figure out how to pay these players and how to handle this going forward and find enforcement mechanisms. If they can do that under the NCAA umbrella, then I think everybody will stick. But if that doesn't work, or if football just feels like it needs to break off on its own, I think it can and possibly will. It's just a matter of, it's just not going to leave the athletics department. I just never see that. I will not live long enough to see that day.
Scott Dochterman joining us from The Athletic as we check in on happenings in the Big 12, etc. Did you happen to find out what time the Cyhawk game is going to kick off on your venture out the West?
We'll probably find out later this week.
You think so?
Stu Mandel and I, we did a exercise yesterday, or posted yesterday, on the first 3 weeks of the football season. And to me, it's a no-brainer that it's going to go in the midday on CBS, because, right now you've got Texas and Michigan. It's going to be on Big Fox. And then you have Colorado, Nebraska, which is going to be on NBC, which leaves CBS with the third. And really the only couple of options would be the Cyhawk. I think both teams have a chance to be ranked in that game. You have Kansas and Illinois. I don't think that one measures up. And then, Ohio State plays a nobody, but Ohio State's Ohio State, and you always have to respect that. But I think that the Cyhawk is going to be 2:30 local time on CBS. I'd be really surprised if it's not.
That's one that we identified early on, and I think it would be a perfect one, and great to see a national audience for that. The Big Ten money continues to roll in. You're number one of going through this exercise. We know Oregon, there's a lot of buzz about this Ducks team and what Lanning has built there and what they have a potential to be. Do you anticipate, we see this a lot, teams that make a move, even if it's not a step up, but just a different league, there are growing pains that go along with it. Do you anticipate seeing that for the four newbies this year in the Big Ten football-wise?
I think Oregon's got the best chance to survive it, but they do have some challenges ahead of them. I mean, they play Ohio State at home. They got to go to Michigan. Not only do they play, I believe, USC, and they definitely play Washington. And then they travel to some other places around the country. So I think they've got a chance to be very good this year. I think Washington and UCLA have a chance to really fall and possibly not go to a bowl game. Washington, returns one starter from last year's team. They had 11 draft picks, and they had 30 plus players enter the portal. Yes, they brought in a lot from Arizona, but that's going to be really difficult for them to even come to an Iowa City and win in a place like Iowa. You just don't do that, and they've got to play Michigan and several other really good teams. So, and then UCLA, new coaching staff. That's going to be a tough build for them. I think USC is kind of a wild card because they're USC, but I think they might be in the 8-4 range. But I think Oregon's the only one that can weather it this year. But it remains to be seen. I mean, Mizzou had a great couple of years in the SEC to start off with, and then kind of faltered back to being Mizzou. And I think out of these 4 newbies, I think they all have the potential to be competitive. But in the long term, I think in the short term, Oregon's the only one to really get past the growing pains of finding a new conference.
Doc, I know this doesn't involve Iowa, but maybe you know the answer to this. Trent and I were kicking around last week when the night schedule was released, the Friday night games, and Michigan State is hosting Purdue. We thought back to last year that there was a November night game with involved Michigan State, but they moved it inside Ford Field. Do you know if that game will remain outdoors at East Lansing, or do we know?
I think it's at Purdue, isn't it? So
I thought it was at Michigan State. Well, regardless, will it stay?
No, that was because of Penn State. It was on Thanksgiving weekend. It was Black Friday, and Penn State complains a lot, and they ended up moving it to Ford Field. Yeah. And part of that was also you got different. And the students won't be there for Michigan State, and so it kind of makes sense. And this time around it's the week before. It's the penultimate weekend, and you see that there's 9 out of 10 weekends are spoken for on Fox. There'll be 5 other night games announced later this week. So I think it's going to be fascinating to take a look at this.
Doc, the shopping appears to be done for Iowa football. They got the backup quarterback, or maybe a guy that can push McNamara. Of course, got Jacob Gill coming in. I'm sure they're still looking, seeing if there's anything out there. Do you anticipate, though, that we're going to hear anything that Iowa's looking hard at another position group at minimum to try to build out that roster? Or are they basically set going into August camp?
They have looked at defensive tackles, and they examined one, and his asking price was really high, even though he was a Division II guy, and so they passed on that, and because they were like, well, our starters are better than you, and so I think right now it's kind of like, what's the price? So they're looking still, but at this point they are pretty well set. I don't see them going out and getting, unless somebody falls in their lap, which has happened a few times. I just don't see that happening. I think they're more or less set. But defensive tackle is somebody they are still kind of eyeing at this point.
Along the lines of we didn't see that happening, I'm guessing not a lot of folks settled in their seats in the Mandalay Bay on Friday night to watch, or Saturday to watch Indiana and Las Vegas with Bluter, Jensen and company. They're all there to watch it. And it's the Kate Martin show that they watched. I mean, that's great, Doc. Don't get me wrong. And it's wonderful. She made the team, and she's having the impact that she did. But she's actually having an impact, Doc. I think it's great for Kate Martin. I did not see that coming. I know I'm not alone.
You're right. I didn't see it coming either. I didn't think she'd get drafted. I thought maybe she'd get signed to compete in a camp or something like that. But I did not see her, really getting drafted, let alone having this kind of impact, because she's, a valued member off the bench, and she's been playing really well. I mean, she's doing everything that she did at Iowa. She's just doing it for the, the best team in the WNBA, and it's really great to see for her, because she. She's the glue. She's the money player. She's acquired that nickname again, organically. It's not like it followed her from Iowa. So I think it's been fantastic for her so far, and just to have, 3 of the best Hawkeye players, in the last 25 years, on the same court, and have all of Iowa's coaches, current and former, along with them. I think you couldn't have asked in that sport. You couldn't have had a better commercial for Iowa for 2 hours.
Are we going to see Caitlin Clark on Team USA? Do you anticipate with what we saw here early on, she's going to solidify maybe that last spot on the roster and be there as they make their way over for the Olympics?
That seems to be the indication. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, it's just weird to me how 2 weeks ago was her first WNBA game, just 2 weeks ago, and yet we sometimes, for the Twitter barking and what have you, it seems like she's played for 2 months and she sucked. And it's like, no, her, she scores more points than anybody else. Her teammates don't do anything for her at all. Their screens are bad. They don't set her up for any shots. She's the de facto point guard. And then, and if she has to create her own shot, and that's it. I mean, she's passing the ball, but nobody's passing it to her in an open spot. So, I think that, if she was to take the month off or a couple weeks off instead of going to the Olympics, I think it'd probably be better for her mental health wise, but she is still the most popular player there is. I'm not saying best, but most popular. And you kind of want to have that in the Olympics.
That's Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. Always enjoy conversations with Doc as we go inside of Iowa sports and a little bit deeper into the future of the Big Ten, of the NCAA, and what is still coming. What is coming for Iowa women's basketball? We talked about recruiting on the front side of things. Let's take a look at the ladies, what they have, and potentially another huge recruit for the class of 2025. We'll do that as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Trent Condon back with you one final time here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. So as we sit here on Tuesday evening, some potential news that's going to be coming down is Iowa, the women's basketball program, has got down to one of the finalists for Fran McCaffery, a top-level player from the Washington area, Washington State. Big-time prospect, another top 20 player, Addie Deal. I mean, that was a huge one. Addie Deal is a big part of the future of Iowa basketball, about what Jan Jensen's going to be doing in the future, and really carrying on the momentum that has been built. Because we've seen these blips. We've seen programs that have risen up because of a great player and then go back down. We talked a lot about Cheryl Swoops back in the 90s. She's taken her team to the Final Four and a national championship, and she did those things. Have we heard from Texas Tech since? What I'm saying is we don't want Iowa women's basketball to turn into Texas Tech, that went to heights that we hadn't seen before under one great player and then fell back. That is one of the difficult aspects. And recruiting is the lifeblood of any program. It sounds like early on, talking to a couple people in the recruiting space, that the returns early for Jan Jensen taking over as the head coach have been very good, but you still got to sign them on the dotted line, right? And this is a zero-sum business, right? You can't go out there and finish second a bunch. As we learned, we have a lot of these examples in a lot of different sports at the time with Iowa, and that will be, maybe that'll be a summer project. We'll play the what-if game of some of the prospects that almost made their way to Iowa City. We've heard it a ton. It's happened a ton. Now the next step, getting one of these players, and a deal was already in. And then she just said, yes, she's going to continue with her commitment to Iowa, even with the coaching change. Somebody that hasn't had that commitment, though, that's going to be the next step. And we'll see if that first one comes here tomorrow on that one. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We get you covered each and every day, talking the world of Iowa Hawkeye athletics. And if you're sitting around, you're watching FS1, ESPN all day on your TV, maybe you're in your cubicle, you're in your office, and you got that going on, and you have to turn down that volume because of all that ridiculous shouting. Well, it's time for you to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We will talk to you tomorrow. We will have a decision on Payton Sandfort. Will he, won't he? And a whole lot more football talk, basketball. Oh, we are always busy, even as we make our way through the quiet time of the year. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.